So today's presentation is going to be on project administration for the AC Level 1 exam. And as you can see here from the cover page, it's going to talk about procurement, duties and responsibilities of the different roles on a project, mobilization, project closeout, and sustainability. Excuse me. So, the first aspect is procurement. And what I have done is I've highlighted in yellow the key points that really need to be discussed. And then I'm going to provide you with documents that show different illustrations of each one of these concepts. So the first one that I want to discuss, and it's not on your review here, but it's very important. It's one that most people tend to overlook the most when they are looking at starting a project. It's reviewing the contract with the owner. Everything starts and ends with the contract that is signed with the owner. All the general contractor's responsibilities, everything. And you can see what I'm showing here, that it talks about the contract will include duration, your billing requirements, retainage reductions, allowances, clarifications, notice requirements, reporting requirements, your schedule, your accepted alternates, and value engineering. And so, in order to live up to the agreement, because the contract is the agreement between the contractor and the owner, it's very, very critical that all the managerial staff on the project review that contract before they commence work. This includes the project manager and the superintendent. So let's flip over back to the main screen. And it's talking here about generally on commercial construction, you have a general contractor that oversees and hires subcontractors. Part of the effort is done, particularly on CM at risk contracts, with pre-qualifying subcontractors. So here is an example about, you've heard me talk about EMR ratings. EMR ratings have to deal with the safety of a company. This is an example from a bonding company to show what EMR rating that company has. If you'll recall, and this is relative to your safety module, this 0.57 is a very important, it's a very good rate, but anything over 1 is troublesome. So that's the first thing you have to do as part of pre-qualifying. The next thing that happens, don't know why we're on that. Okay. The next thing has to do with, let's stop a second. I've missed a exhibit. Hang on. Okay. The other thing that's important to realize when you're in the process of pre-qualifying subcontractors and in buying out the job is they all have to have insurance. And in one of the aspects of the study manual, we talk about the different forms of insurance. And we mentioned ROSIP, which the acronym stands for Rolling Owner Controlled Insurance Program. Generally, this is enacted by big systems. In this particular case, it's the University of Texas. And they come in and they provide the workers' compensation, employer's liability, general liability, completed operations, and excess liability insurance on a project. But they're capitalizing on their huge buying power because they're a big institution, so they can get the price of providing that insurance is far less than for a single general contractor. So it's a good program. However, there are some hidden caveats to it. It generally costs more money to implement because there are more stringent requirements, such as pre-qualifying subs, such as to the point about doing background checks on subcontractors, particularly on campuses where there's children, of things of that nature. They're going to do sex offender checks. They're also going to make sure that you're not in arrears for any alimony or child support payments. So that is another aspect of the ROSEP program. Let's talk about subcontractor pre-qualification. And I've shown up here what Tellefson uses as their standards for pre-qualifying subcontractors. And it is a multi-point approach. It's not just how much money can they actually provide cash flow for. Does it match up with the scope of work? We say if you've got a company that can only provide cash flow about $5,000 a month, and you're doing a project that's about $1 million a month, that's probably not a good marriage or matching up of that subcontractor to that scope of work. So some companies, and as I'm showing here, the subcontractor approval form, you can see here it's got multiple things that are looking for. And right here, I'll enlarge this for you here a little bit. Right here is basically what we call our scorecard. And so we evaluate them internally by all the different team members, and it's an anonymous evaluation based upon how they performed in pre-construction, how they performed in procurement and delivery, how they performed during BIM, their change management, their labor resources. Did they have sufficient resources to build the job? Their quality installation. Did they meet the schedule that was set for them? Did they provide good project controls? We even rank their team culture. Is it consistent with our company culture? And then how well did they close out the job? And all these things are factored together to come up with one rating at the total of where they fit. So this is an example of pre-qualification. Now, part of that also is relative to their bonding capacity. How much work does the bonding agent certify them to be able to handle? They're not bonding companies because they're third-party agents are not going to say a contractor can do more than what they physically can, because if they provide the bond for them, then they're at risk too. So it's almost like getting someone to stand up on your behalf and speak that you're good for handling a situation. So those are examples of pre-qualification. Now, the next big thing that's talked about in here is ethics and pre-construction. So want to make sure that everybody understands about this concept here, bid shopping versus bid peddling. Shopping is a negative term, and it's a negative process. And it is where, and I'm going to bring in another exhibit here for you to look at. This is a scope sheet on a project. And you can see here that you've got 3 different companies across the top. And then you've got a list of items that's part of their scope that they should have picked up. And so the general contractors prepared an estimate here of what they think the dollar amount of this particular scope is. Obviously, it's 002, so it's got to be something related to, I think it's the earthwork divisions. I'm not sure. No, it's demolition. 002 is the demolition CSI division. I see, that's why you always use CSI to gauge everything, because I can look at this without looking at it clearly and know exactly what they're dealing with. So you go through and you compare apples to apples. And in this particular case, if a contractor doesn't have an amount for something, you can level it out. to where it is an apples to apples bid, meaning they've got the full scope covered. And once you've assessed that they've got the full scope covered, then you can assess who is actually low. And in this case, it's contractor C coming in at $63,000. The next contractor was at $65,000. Now, getting them to apples is an ethical thing to do. But if you were to go and you were to look at company A and notice their number is much higher, and you liked company A better, so you called them and you said, hey, I need for you to cut your number by $50,000 so I can give you this job. That is bid shopping. That's unfair to the competitors. It's unfair to the client. And quite frankly, if people find out that you do it, which they will, then subcontractors are not going to want to bid your work, because if they're not in with you, okay, on the front end, they're not one of the favorites, then why bother spending time and money to give them a bid, because you're not going to end up with it. So this is an example of the difference between bid peddling and buyout. Buyout is apples to apples. Bid peddling is calling someone and asking them to actually reduce their number so that you can use them on a project. Now, we're going to talk about the procurement process, and for that I want to bring in this particular diagram. This is an example of the cost development process. And in this, you can see where we talk about applying a historical database at the different levels of design, plus doing a quantity takeoff, doing a conceptual estimate, value analysis, cost modeling, and then a detailed estimate. The detailed estimate is basically per that scope sheet that I just showed you in the previous, let's see where to go. It's right here. So that would be considered a detailed estimate process. And then you generate the guaranteed maximum price. So once you have done this and you've guaranteed the GMP, then you start on this. We've done the bid scope. We've done the award of the subcontract. We've prepared a subcontract agreement for them. Then you have your submittals. Then you order your material and equipment. And then you install it and invoice it. So these are considered to be the procurement steps that you would go through. One other thing I want to point out is that, some contractors or vendors may propose payment terms that are offer discounts. And that's what this is talking about right here. So, the terms such as 110 net 30, meaning that they would give back a 1% discount if it's paid within 10 days, okay? But regardless, the full payment is due in 30 days. So if you're cash flush as a general contractor and you can afford to pay them in 10 days, then you can reap a 1% discount. That's what those accounting terms are called. This practice used to be very, very prevalent back in the 80s. It's not as utilized as much these days, but it is still from time to time referred to. Okay, now we're going to talk about different roles and responsibilities. And let's see here. Let me find the right place. Okay, so here are the different roles and responsibilities that you typically have on a project. You have the project executive, which is the person that is responsible for the managing the client, making sure the client's happy, and also for getting all the resources necessary to the job so that the actual project manager and superintendent have the materials and the resources they need to execute the project. Your general superintendent is much like a project executive. They both positions handle multiple projects typically and do not spend all their time one day on one job. They have a team that they manage. Project manager is typically you have at least one per job. You can also have a senior PM, which a senior PM might be able to manage more than one project at a time. Assistant project manager means that basically they're capable of executing smaller functions, whereas the project manager is thought to be able to handle anything that comes up on that job to keep it on track. Project engineer, which is probably what most of you all will be starting as, it is an entry-level position, and in this particular case you end up doing a lot of RFIs and submittal reviews and things of that nature. Superintendent, here we go. Superintendent, you know that they're responsible for the day-to-day management in the field. The assistant superintendent is one who works for the superintendent itself. Some of the larger jobs that you have may have multiple assistant superintendents working for a single superintendent. And a field engineer is someone that helps with surveying or laying out the building or reviewing submittals, things of that nature. Administrative assistant is someone who helps you get the contracts written, keeps all the document flow working properly. Subcontract coordinator is typically someone who is in accounting and helps to manage that sub and all the financial records that go with it. You've got safety coordinators who are responsible for the safety operations on a job site. On big jobs, you may have one, maybe even two per job site. But at minimal, you may have one safety coordinator on multiple jobs. Quality specialist, in the case where there are firms that have a quality control department, like Tellefson, you will have someone assigned to that job that is responsible for the quality on a project and is not, this is very important, they are not accountable to the superintendent. They act as an independent third party. And the way that this works, the reason why this works this way is so that there's a check and balance system in place to make sure that things get done appropriately. Virtual design and construction manager, that's the modern day term for BIM. So though that's a specific description of all of these positions that are listed here in your study guide. So let's talk about some of these labor standards. The FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, was originally passed in 1938, and basically it's the minimum wage law. Some people also refer to this as the Davis-Bacon Act. So by area, and it's typically done by different area across the country, the minimum wage rate for Houston, Texas would not necessarily be the same minimum wage rate for Brazos Valley or for Dallas, Texas. It depends upon the market that you're in, and they're generally published, and on federal and state jobs, you typically have to abide by a minimum wage rate, which that should be disclosed to every general contractor in the front end of the job when you are estimating it. The Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, boy, that's a lot of syllables for that acronym. Basically, what you need to know about this is where the I-9 form came into place. And any of you that have been hired by a state or federal agency, or even a private firm, know that you have to fill out an I-9. And it's asking you to prove your citizenship, whether you're a permanent resident or a passport can be used to confirm that. You must show that you, in fact, are a citizen, and if not really sure what happens with that, but it is a way to make sure that if you're not a citizen, then you probably have to have a work visa from the federal government to allow you to work. Don't want you to confuse the I-9 with the W-4. The W-4 is basically your withholding exemption certificate, which tells your employer how much taxes to hold out of your check each pay period. E-Verify is simply the computer system that allows different companies to go in and verify your I-9. The Civil Rights Act of 1965 was also expanded in 1967. The American Disabilities Act came along in 1990, and then the Civil Rights Act again in 1991. And this was basically to tell all employers that you could not discriminate against people based upon their age, color, disability, gender, pregnancy, national origin, race, religion, sexual orientation, veteran status, and genetic information. So these are important aspects of administration that need to be taken into consideration when you're trying to assemble your workforce. Okay. So submittals are let's talk about it this way. Architectural drawings that you get take a certain level of detail. They give you dimensions. They show you where different materials are to abut one another. Sometimes they show you details of those connection points, but oftentimes you have to verify what the existing conditions are, if there are existing conditions. But they take it to, I would say, probably a level of completion, architectural design drawings, CDs, construction documents, probably to about 80% complete at best. Submittals are the product material data and the shop drawings that start looking at 1/4 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch tolerances between materials. And sometimes you have to verify certain dimensions. Sometimes two trades may need to coordinate in terms of how two materials go together, like joint sealants relative to glass mullions. There are certain dimensions that are not laid out on the original set of architectural plans. And the whole purpose of reviewing submittals is to make sure that it will fit within that dimension space that's been allocated for those materials. So they're called shop drawings. And one of the important things to realize with regard to shop drawings, and here's an example of one, is you have to fill out a letter of transmittal. You have to talk about what it's for, how many copies you're providing, and then it goes to the architect of record, and then they have to review it. Now, again, this is sort of you're picking up where the architecture leaves off in today's world of the American Institute of Architects. Architects do not approve them as their own design. They will review and say, okay, they passed our review, but they're not going to take liability for the way it's constructed. So your options are to either have them come back reviewed as noted, rejected, or revise and resubmit. So this whole process with submittals is important because it is about getting on the same page with the designer so that the intent of the original design is actually manifested and carried through for construction. So this is an example of a submittal cover page. Very important. And most of you as field engineers will be doing submittal reviews and RFIs when you start out. That's pretty typical of that position level of entry into the profession. Let's see. So, other documents that are used are notice of award and letter of intent. And I've got an example here of a notice to proceed. This is telling us that on this particular job, and it can be in the form of an email, all it has to say is, "Dear so-and-so from the contractors, please accept this as a notice to proceed for a specified project," and they will provide a date. Pretty simple. It doesn't have to be real formal. For those of you wondering, this particular document is what starts the clock ticking on your schedule and on the contractual requirement for delivery of the project. So that is a very important document, the notice to proceed. A notice of award is just telling you that you finish the interview process, you finish the vetting process, and the owner has decided that they're going to award you this particular project. The letter of intent is, hey, we're going to award you this project, and it is going to be for X number of dollars, so please go ahead and start working on your submittals. So the next thing that's discussed here is a stop work order, and that's generally, obviously, you had to start work before you could stop work. So it doesn't have to be in an official format. It can be an email, but it does have to have the words, that you do stop the work on a particular part of a project. So it can occur either that there are financial issues on the project, or that labor concerns, or any number of reasons. The next item is a schedule of values, and I'm going to show you an example here of schedule of values. You can see that you have, this is an AIA format. You list the particular trades here with their corresponding CSI division codes. You have the scheduled value, and then total completed and stored to date is in this column. This is a function of what all has been done in, you can see they track what you've done in previous applications versus what this period is, which is typically a month. This is a column for materials purchased and stored to date. There are requirements by some owners that you have to have in a bonded warehouse, or that you have a letter certifying by a third party that they are actually stored in a safe place. Because if something should happen to them before they get delivered to the job site, then you've got a problem. If you lose them, whose responsibility is that? So it's then got a percentage complete, and then a balance to finish, and then you can see here the retainage that we talked about, which is typically 10% on most jobs. So that's what a schedule of values looks like. Permits. Permits can be multiple things. Here's an example of a permit from the City of Houston. It will indicate the name of your project, and then it will show here that these are all from the structural department for a particular project. So it is looked at multiple aspects. What the key part is that you've got a permit number. and you can see it over here, this permit number. That is the way you track it within the system of whatever authority having jurisdiction is issued the permit. And what's critical about permits is that you've got to close them out. And sometimes subcontractors will pull permits on a job and then fail to notify the general contractor, and you think you can close out a project, but there's one open. So you have to be mindful of tracking all the permits that you get on a project, which is why this is brought up. Here we go, one of my personal favorites, Certificate of Substantial Completion. Let's see here. Here is an example of a substantial completion certificate. This is a variation of an AIA document. You can see it's got the big word, Certificate of Substantial Completion. What's key about this document is this is the document that ties back to the contract that says you completed the project as agreed to by the owner, the architect, and the general contractor of a particular project on a specific date. This is what stops the time from clicking off relative to liquidated damages that you may have in a job. So in this particular case, you can see up here that the date of substantial completion is August 19th of 2016. If the contract stated that liquidated damages would go into effect August 1st, then you would have to pay damages from August 1st, liquidated damages between August 1st and August 19th. So the next thing we're going to talk about is RFIs and requests for information. And per the definition, that is a request for clarification by the contractor to the designers, the architect or engineers. So here's a sample of an RFI. You indicate who it's from, who it's to, and you state clearly the question. Oftentimes in RFIs you can attach clippets of the drawing here to demonstrate your point of what's going on. And then there's a place for the contractor to indicate suggestions as to how to deal with the issue. What's critical here is that the architect responds and tells you the direction, because the general contractors are not the designers, and so you should never take on that liability, and that should stay with the architect of record. So the next section deals with as-builts, and as-builts are an important part of any project closeout function. They represent the final documents as to what was actually constructed in place. And as you all know, it's folly to think that everything's going to go according to plan. And so sometimes there are unforeseen things that happen that cause you to not put a hose bib or a manhole in a certain location. So that's where as-builts come into place. It's very important for the superintendent to document on a set of plans exactly what was constructed if it is different than what the original design called for. Now, granted, you have RFIs and ASIs to demonstrate that and change orders, but the the owner at the end of the job generally has a facilities group that needs to manage that project going forward. And so it's very important that they have a good set of as-builts where they can see what's in certain places, so that when they go to do ancillary work or they have to make repairs, say 5-10 years down the road, they've got a reasonable set of drawings. These days, as-builts are all done in digital format. So typically Bluebeam or sometimes AutoCAD is used. It just depends upon the general contractor and what their preferred medium is and what the owner asks for. Some owners may ask for a specific software because that's the kind of software that they're using to manage their system, their system of documents. that can be a rather tedious task. Trust me, I've encountered that before, and it can get very convoluted, particularly if the owner has a unique system that they're using their documents and requires that all that be converted into. So it's a very important aspect of the closeout phase. The next thing that we're going to talk about is change orders, and change orders are very similar to the certificate of substantial completion. They are the only thing that can modify the contract, period, going forward once you sign the original contract. Change orders can be in the form of verbal changes, as in language changes to the contract. Excuse me. They also can affect monetary, and they can affect time. So here's a sample of a change order and this is on one of the state jobs that I worked on. You can see it's got areas here for how they want to know specifically what is the cost of work, general conditions, contingencies, the fee, how it changes from one change order to the next. They also want to know, as you can see here, right here, they want to know if the substantial completion date is altered because of this change order. And then everyone, including the owner, architect, and the contractor, has to sign it before it becomes a formal, agreed-upon amendment to the contract. So change orders are very, very important to the entire process. There are different ways of executing change orders. This is a generic flow chart. Every company's different. Every company may have certain people that need to sign off on change orders before they become real. So this is part of the protocols that need to be discerned at the beginning of the job, so that there are no delays in executing changes as the project proceeds. The next thing is a construction change directive, and the only time that this is used is the owner, and it's stated as such in contracts, may reserve the right to order the contractor to make changes before a price has been agreed upon. And so contractors should be leery of that, simply because the best time for negotiation is before you've actually done the work. However, these are recognized tools by the AIA, American Institute of Architects. And so a construction change directive, I have had them used on me before, and it requires a lot of trust between the contractor and the owner before implementing one of those. ASI, Architectural Supplemental Instruction. It is a document supposedly to issue minor change orders, minor changes in the scope of work without affecting cost or schedule. Now, I say this qualifyingly, is that I've seen it more and more prevalent in our business that these are used even when there are cost and time changes required because of what's being asked for. So not everybody is adhering to the specific originally agreed upon definition of an ASI. So you need to be aware of that. This is an example of the AI document. It's the G710, Architect Supplemental Instructions, and you can see here it will list what attachments and what sheets are involved and what the change is. So again, be aware that it's supposed to be minor changes in scope without changes in schedule or costs, but I've seen it used where there are major schedules and costs. I think that is people taking latitude with the definition. For the purpose of your preparation for the exam, I would definitely specify if it comes up on the exam that it is without any changes of schedule or cost in it. The next phase is talking about claims and disputes. And there are 3 or 4 important points upon this. If there's a conflict between the plans and specs, I know it says here that the specifications will govern as a matter of fact. What I will tell you is that the true intent of it is that whatever is the most detailed will govern. So if there's a note on the plans that is more detailed than the specifications, 9 times out of 10, every architect is within their rights to enforce you to do the more detailed version or the one that costs the most. But for the purpose of the exam, specifications will govern because they are typically more detailed. In terms of claim resolution, the contract will represent what are allowable claims and how they can be resolved. And you can either do them through negotiation between the owner and the architect and the general contractor, or it can be spelled out that you use either mediation, arbitration, or litigation. Now, I will tell you that they get more specific and more costly as you go down this list. Okay? With litigation being the most expensive because you actually go to court, you oftentimes get a jury trial, you've got to pay lawyers, it'll take longer to resolve. But typically in the contract, it'll state that your form of remedy may be mediation, or it may be arbitration, or it may be litigation. And that's up to the general contractor and the owner when you're negotiating the job in terms of what your terms of your contract are going to be. Mediation is where there is a neutral third party mitigator that comes in and tries to come up with a resolution after listening to both parties. You do not always come to an acceptable settlement with this. So it's not always preferred. Arbitration, on the other hand, is a situation where you have typically a lawyer, or it can be a specialist in the field, and whatever the dispute is over, comes in and listens to both parties and then declares a decision. That decision that is declared is legally binding. Yes, it is legally binding. So again, it gets more specific, and if the arbitration doesn't go well, you can somehow lose out on winning your case. Litigation, I've had many lawyers tell me it's basically a crapshoot. Besides being more money, if you get a jury trial, it depends upon the jury that's selected, and it can vary quite a bit in terms of the outcome in your favor. No one ever wants to go to these, but my one comment is that it's very important to know what your rights are as set forth in the contract and what you negotiate up front. Anytime it goes to mediation, arbitration, or litigation, nobody's winning because of the time lost, and generally that means you're not going to be fulfilling the contract and getting your full reward for that. So that's just one thing in terms of practicality, expertise. You really don't want to go there. You want to avoid it as much as you possibly can. Quality control is what we're going to talk about next. And there are several different ways that you can do quality control. It's becoming more and more the trend that general contractors have their own QA, QC, quality assurance, quality control departments. And as we stated before, as I stated previously, those individuals are not accountable to the superintendents, because you want to create as much of a third party outside influence to make sure that things are being built according to the best way. I will tell you that in Tellefson's viewpoint, we started doing this many, many years ago because we have a tendency, because we only work in Houston, Texas, that we warrant our work, and we didn't want a lot of callbacks. So if you don't want a lot of warranty callbacks, you particularly want to make sure you do it right the first time, and that's what quality control is about. So I'm just going to show you a few things here on quality control. Some of the aspects of quality control are peer reviews, and you can see here peer reviews being done before pre-installation meetings. Pre-installation meetings come before submittal and shop drawing reviews, then doing a functional mock-up, and I'll show you something about that. Then you have inspections along the way, and then it ends up in warranty. And this is basically ensuring a good final project that is got a high level of quality to it. Quality inspections are another aspect of the process that I just outlined. And typically what's done is a written report will be completed by the inspector with photographs of the conditions that they're talking about. And it's very important that during their inspections that they observe, then they communicate with the people doing the work on site. So in this case, whatever this flashing detail is right here, the quality inspector would have spoken with the masonry contractor and the superintendent to make sure that it's being done properly while they were on site, and then they would follow up with a report. Just to note for the record to make sure everything's being taken care of. Quality mock-ups. I'm going to show you something here. Here is a functional quality mock-up. You can see here this is and basically what they're intended to be is every time you have a dissimilar material butting up next to each other, you have an opportunity for leaks. So a mock-up will look at all the conditions that's on the plans where dissimilar materials are meeting, such as brick and metal, sheetrock and stucco, any metal panels next to brick. They all have varying tolerances, and they have varying surfaces. So you will see when a mock-up is starting, you'll see the contractor put together a drawing and give to the architect and say, this is what we're going to put together on the conditions. Is there anything else that you're concerned about that needs to be on there? And then you will then build this mock-up well before it's time to install it, so that everybody has a time to work through the design, iron out the kinks, so that by the time you get ready to install it, you have all those functional things figured out that could potentially cause leaks or weaknesses in the building, particularly the exterior veneer of the building. Let's see what we're talking about here. Punch list. We're going to go a quality observation log. All of these things that we're talking about are built into one log that people can then take and look at and then check off, kind of like a punch list, to make sure that it's being dealt with and that nothing is overlooked during the process of construction. A good contractor will be sure to manage that log. So that's a lot about the quality control process. We're going to go into project closeout now, and it is the final phase. A lot of times we refer to this as closeout, turnover, And then the owner has activation, which is mean they take possession of the building, start moving furniture and fixtures in so that they can take occupancy of the building for its intended purpose. So one of the things that goes with that is the punch list, and here is a process on how the punch list is managed and who is responsible for that. Both the project manager and superintendent work on this together. It is generally agreed upon date that the architect walks the building with the architect and contractor to make a list of those things that need to go on the punch list that are not 100% complete at the time of substantial completion. Repeat, this is very important. The punch list is generated and is attached to the substantial completion certificate. And basically the punch list represents everything that is minor that has to be fixed before final completion can be granted on that project. There are lots of tools right now being used for punch list, plan grid, other things that can be used that will mark and show up where things need to be done, and list given to the subcontractors. Generally, it could be anywhere from 10 days to a month that you would have to complete the process. So this is a short process. It's not intended to go for a long period of time, and the subcontractors all have to be responsible to do their part. Okay, with regard to project closeout, there are several things that have to be done before you're considered completely closed out. Generally, these things are required before you get final completion. At final completion, what's important to realize is that's when you get paid your retainage, when the owner's satisfied that you are 100% complete with the project. So one of those requirements would be O&M manuals, operations and maintenance manuals. So as you're procuring the job, you will get information from the suppliers and the vendors on different products. Say, for instance, an example would be a certain type of flooring. There may be a certain way that it needs to be cleaned in order for it to keep its good-looking finish. So here is an example of a process that we go through in obtaining the O&M manual data on every material that we put in the project. That is generally the project manager's responsibility or assistant PMs. There is a financial closeout process that has to be done as well. And again, that is the project manager's duty and responsibility to do the financial closeout. We'll show you what a project summary document looks about. Because remember, one of the important things about this is your company that you're working for, we get new work based upon demonstrating to others that we've done similar type of work. So when you finish a project out, it's really important that you have documented what that project was, how big it was, what the dollar amount was, the square footage, who was the architect, so you can, post people for referrals for different projects. And this is a sample of a project summary closeout where all the team members are listed, all the data, the owner, the contract amount, final fee, those sort of things are shown. And then here is a status update as to whether or not certain things have been done in order to complete the project. At Tellefson, one of the things that we look for is that a final schedule has been done, so we have good historical information on that job. So that's a really important component to the closeout documentation, beyond you typically think of as the O&Ms, but there's more to it than that. And then lastly, what you want to do is have a good warranty experience, and typically owners will require that you have a warranty kickoff meeting, and how the general contractor manages warranties. That person should be there introduced to the owner so that they know what the process is when something happens in the building and warranty needs to be called in. So, and one very important thing about warranty, you need to make sure that all your subs have insurance that's covering the warranty period, because if they get called out to fix something, let's say an HVAC unit has a problem and they need to go out and do some repairs, then it's important that you have them covered for insurance so that they don't go out there, trip and fall, have an accident, and then you don't have coverage for it. That's one of those tricks to the trade that most people don't really think about when they're doing all this. So, the last thing we're going to talk about is sustainability. And in the contracting business, LEED is basically the system that the U.S. uses to create buildings that are sustainable. The sustainability means that they have a long life, that the buildings will be able to stand for a long period of time. Oftentimes during design, you hear architects ask what the owner, do you want a 50-year building? Do you want a 100-year building? Because depending upon what materials you choose to build a building with, that will have a big impact on what the materials are. Oftentimes, if you want a 50-year building, you're going to build out of concrete, whereas if you're only going to build it and have it in place for 10 years, you might build it out of steel because it's cheaper, it's quicker, but it won't stand up to the test of time. So LEED is the organization that's run by the U.S. Green Building Council, USGBC. You need to know what that acronym is for. That is the governing agency that covers this LEED accreditation that you can get on buildings. You can get buildings either certified LEED, silver, gold, or platinum. Obviously, platinum is the most number of measures, gold the second, silver third, and certified is the lowest that you can get in terms of qualifying a building. This system was set in place in 1998. It has to do with energy requirements, water efficiency, the material and resources, sometimes even the way that you handle construction. Like if you do recycling during construction, you can get LEED points for that. This is a whole different system, and there are a lot of people that take LEED certification exams because owners will come in and mandate that they have LEED officials, LEED certified personnel working on their jobs. I think the last thing that you need to know about this is, in preparation for the exam, that you really need to know that in other parts of the world, they have different systems. You can see here the Canadian-based system is called Green Globe. BREEAM is used in the United Kingdom, Green Star in Australia, and CASB in Japan. So this is not a globally, there's no global accreditation. Each country has done the initiative and come up with their own. And I think that's partly because of the different environments that they're subject to. So you need to understand that there are other agencies that govern different parts of the world when it comes to obtaining LEED. So that's it. This is the administrative piece. I know it's long, but this should get you through all the definitions, and I've tried to brighten it up a little bit to with examples of the different materials so that you get a better understanding of what all these documents are. If you have a long career in construction, I promise you, you will get to deal with each and every one of these documents. Thank you.